Intro. Item number 123 was placed before the council. The votes tallied at 92 opposed and 8 in favor, and the motion is denied. Majority Leader Thisdale returned, with an emphatic pound of his gavel. Additional funding for further study into the viability of green energy production is simply not within the fiscal budget at this time. The available funding will be diverted into the continued advancement of techno-design, a subsidiary of the Icarus Foundation. The announcement was met with a precise measure of approval. The contributions of the Icarus Foundation to scientific and engineering development were staggering, even in the eyes of their staunchest detractors, well-deserved, yet garnered its fair share of disappointment as well. "This is unacceptable," Senator McClarkman stated angrily. "The resources of our world are not inexhaustible, they're finite, and the choice we make on this day will have ramifications long beyond the breadth of our meager lifetimes." Her aging eyes conveyed her objection. "I motion for a recount immediately." Strife filled the room, the fragile balance offered between people and pretense now obliterated by the black hearts of political assassins, and the viciousness of politics was set free. "Are you insane? We've spent 14 hours debating an issue with only one clear outcome already, and you would have us invest more time, set aside more pressing social concerns, to further a lost cause? The vote has been cast, Senator McClarkman. The motion failed. Please allow democracy to have its day," Senator Weiland returned in protest. "If you wish to revisit the issue later, follow the established procedures and place the measure before the council at a later venture." "So, it's step aside, Madam Senator, is that it?" Senator McClarkman asked, sarcastically. "Perhaps I'd feel differently, more structured to your frame of thinking, if Icarus had recently made a substantial contribution towards my re-election campaign, Senator. Or was it a payoff to secure your vote today?" The room exploded into chaos. Questioning one's integrity tends to do that, and the eyes and ears of corruption are careless of anything save its own designs. The stranger walked unnoticed, a seemingly impossible feat considering his size, and purposely made his way towards the front of the room. The soft dimming of the lights, the sudden disruption of the monitors, all oblivious to the eyes of the contaminated. Stress, arguments, irritability, greed, pettiness, and deception. Hostility, aggression, selfishness, backstabbing, and the slightest hint of genuine concern thrown in to enhance the subtle flavor of simmering oppression. All validating the last component necessary for him to reveal himself and make his final assessment. He was nearly midway of the aisle before anyone noticed his presence at all. A shrill cry forced an end to the surrounding conflict. Terror was given breath, and it brought an immediate rush of security into the council chamber. A sudden chill, searing and mind-numbing cold at the same time, washed over the room in a wave of unimaginable panic. Lying was the very blood of the profession they chose for themselves, the craft perfected with such expertise its spoken facsimile was indistinguishable from the truth before the eyes of those they professed to serve. Yet, they were speechless. Their tongues were capable of spitting poisonous venom with the deadly accuracy of a viper, laced with such fragrance and flavor it was far too intoxicating to not be indulged by the populace, and great was the voice that moved the people. Yet, as they stood there in terror, faced with a truth none of them dared to acknowledge, they were rendered mute, helpless before an ominous sense of failure dredged from the depths of some long-forgotten memory. Pandemonium ensued, the desperate act of self-preservation offered by frightened people fearful for their very lives, yet ultimately doomed to failure nonetheless. Commands were issued, but subsequently ignored. Shots were fired, but proved inconsequential at best. And attempts to leave were made, yet woefully encountered the firm resistance of doors refusing to open and windows unable to break. The pleas of the damned were issued through shriveled cries, the thought of imminent death now rampant among them, yet not once did he raise his voice in anger nor move to act against them. He cast their attempts aside, efforts to displace him as meaningless as the bite of an ant upon a mountain in his eyes, and continued forward, making his way towards the end of the aisle, before suddenly turning and beginning his trek down a single row. It would be hard to determine the mindset of those standing as witnesses before the moment, to give credence to the fragile thread holding their souls tethered to their bodies, yet fear seems almost insulting in comparison. But it wasn't his nearly 9 feet in height that gave breath to such anguish, or the sheer width of his massive shoulders that brought forth such emotions, nor was it his robust frame or how he so carelessly brushed their assaults aside which shook them to their core. It was his sheer presence, the absolute beauty of the intricately adorned naked body, so akin to their own, that terrified them to no end. He continued, making his way past several frightened people cowering in their seats, and strode forward undeterred, stopping only when he came to stand before a frail-looking old woman, her hair far too gray for her exact age to be discussed, and turned to face her. The suddenness of his movements betrayed their eyes, the sharp sound of weapons firing noting their belief, yet he refused to allow anything to deter him from falling to his knees and kneeling before her. His body went rigid, his posture prone, and he bowed his head low. "It is my honor to come before you once again, great elder, and I would ask your counsel before I offer my determination." His voice carried the very sweetness of honey layered within every inflection and tone, pulled upon the very strings of their hearts until they were near unto bursting, yet held a savagery within it that spoke volumes about the truth of his purpose. It seemed incomprehensible. Senator Margaret Holmes had been a stable fixture in the political world for nearly 50 of her 73 years of life, her very face and features a constant source of humor among the populace. She was respected by all, beloved, and had endured the loss of family and friends to war, sickness, and death for longer than she cared to admit. But this was beyond her years, beyond her understanding, and she was lost to the moment. Her body went limp, her head snapped back, and her consciousness fled into the dark recesses of her brain to allow another to come forward. A slight convulsion shook her, harmless but noticeable, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a small knot began to make its way from the pit of her stomach, her skin stretching slightly as it made its way upward to come to rest within the ball of her throat. Her features shifted, reshaping to erase the numerous battles of countless years with ignorant politicians, before softly settling into place, a warm voice issuing from lips impervious to time. "You have grown, young one. Matured. And your union is strong. I am pleased." The room grew still again, the person sitting among them, known to them for nearly half a century, no longer the person they knew, and they watched in silence as the meeting commenced. The stranger lifted his head, his eyes looking upon the face of one he once called his mentor, and accepted her praise with humility. "I was fortunate to come unto the path of our Lord under the guidance of a kind elder, and hold her teachings to my heart." He paused, allowing the moment to pass as he gathered the courage to continue, and let his heart speak freely. "If asked, I would delay my determination, for an agreed-upon amount of time, should you feel they warrant the extension." It was a touching offer, more than they deserved, but she had drawn her own conclusions. "No, young one. I have felt it for nearly an age now, and time is no longer a gift we may offer them. My tests have run their course, with little, if any, in the way of a return, and your assessment must be rendered without haste if the batch is to be saved." If questioned about his emotional state at that moment, as the stranger rose to his feet with his eyes locked upon the soft features of her face, he could only describe it as relieved. He was relieved she refused his offer of deferment, relieved she understood the severity of his task, and relieved she placed the sanctity of their mission above her own personal agendas. His head turned, his eyes scanning the faces of those surrounding them, and the severe nature of his order was clearly etched into his brow. The harmonics of his voice were gone, the sweet taste of honey replaced by the bitterness of unripe fruit, and his tone now sliced through the thickness of the air with the viciousness of a double-edged sword. "Status?" The displaced senator found herself weary, as though she placed the burden of guilt squarely upon her shoulders, recovered, and answered clearly. "Inoculation unsuccessful, widespread viral infection rampant, complete loss of subject material within half a generation." "Has contamination been verified?" "Yes. 100% contamination to 50% of subject material, probability of recovery less than 1%. 35% of subject material infected with mild symptoms, probability of recovery at 42%. 15% of subject material remains untainted." His eyes brightened slightly. "What is your priority assessment of subject material?" Removal and immediate relocation of viable subject material, she answered flatly. And your suggestions for remaining subject material? She sighed, regretting what must be said, but continued. This location is compromised, but well established. I suggest an immediate purge of the viral pathogen and the re-establishment of this location within another sector. Loss of contaminated material must be deemed acceptable, but suggest long-term quarantine to the remaining 35% of infected material, with the possibility of stabilization within accepted limits. Defense of Alpha-class location and potentially viable material is requested. You still believe they may prove to be worthy? Their history is long and unfortunately repetitive, but ground zero of the pathogen, as always with their kind, has been determined within a single generation, young one, merely the blink of an eye. Stabilization is possible. They are his chosen. I do believe. I must. His eyes read the sincerity of her heart, captured the truth of her trust without question, and his hand slowly lifted to trace the intricate pattern upon his neck, a soft glow radiating outward to caress the air. Your report, an authoritative voice echoed throughout the room. Pandemic-level contamination is confirmed, pathogen verified as rampant, and 50% of all subject material must be classified as lost. 15% of subject material remains viable, no infection present, and will be relocated for continued development. Probability of positive results within remaining subject material considered within parameters, quarantine is suggested. Continued enemy advancement probable. Requesting an allocation of forces to defend Alpha-class location and remaining potential subject material. Final determination, the Scorch protocol is warranted. The assessment concludes. He registered his report, the passage of a lingering moment drawing the faith of a world into its midst before the voice returned. Your determination is accepted. Allocation of forces is granted. All quarantine facilities are now active, with the condition of viable material being sequestered for confirmation imposed for the duration of the subject quarantine. The Scorch protocol is approved. You are free to act without delay. And what of the elder? The elder shall be allowed to continue her work and may return to her current studies, contingent upon her establishing the parameters for the viable strain, upon relocation, to advance the development of a vaccination against the pathogen. Understood. The soft glow subsided, the burden of his order, a reaper, now gnawing upon his soul with ravenous intent, and he lifted his eyes towards the ceiling as though pleading for this burden to be removed from him. He relented, accepted his fate, and whispered unto the truth. Awaken. The pulse surged from his body instantly, a burst of energy so pure it held less substance than a beam of light, and countless eyes, long closed to slumber, were opened once again, his voice seemingly heard throughout the world. You have 7 days to reach your designated facility. Failure to do so will result in your death. If knowledge of such facilities has not been revealed to you, your contamination is pervasive, and you will face oblivion. His distress was evident, and she nodded in understanding. Heavy is the burden of the righteous hand. It strikes blindly, cruelly, and hears not the voice of those who cry out for mercy. He bowed his head graciously. Have them make haste, elder. The scorch will be upon them soon.